is the autobiography? I think it's sometimes, I think we hear that. I think it's more, I think a misunderstanding. Like Ignatius himself did not write his own autobiography, right? So it is more of reminiscence. It's more like he recount the story to somebody else. So I think it's important to even before we dive into the story itself, how the story come to be. Because I think this is very important for us to know, because I think, Jesuits, us, and I think you're very much interested in Ignatian spirituality. We are telling story all the time. Human beings, we love telling story about our background. Every time we meet, we introduce each other. And then I'm sure you go to work, you got to do your resume, you tell your story, and basically marketing and telling ourselves, right? So we tell our story in different way. How is the story come about? That's number one. Who does Ignatius telling to? That's number two. That's very important. So here's the thing, contrary with a lot of people thinking, Ignatius doesn't follow his life like Zoom or like reality TV, like we think. So he was accomplished man in his late 50s, and he was a general already. So he went through his life already. So this is a time he looked back. So when he looked back, it's very intentional. And look back, he highlights, right? I mean, a life of a man, any person is rich. And in a certain amount of time, we can only tell a certain amount of information. So the way he picked the information is also important. So how is the story come about? One of the things that Ignatius always wrestling with was the narcissistic tendency in himself. Well, all of us Jesuits, we have that issue too, right? So it's a very sense of kind of more like focus on me. And Ignatius fought that for the whole life. So he refused to tell about his story. It's not about him. But then at the end of his life, he began already this religious order called the Society of Jesus already began and then growing around the world. So one of his friends, his name is Nadal. It's a very important name in the history of the society. He approached Ignatius and convinced Ignatius, said like, Ignatius, you got to tell your story. And Ignatius, no, right? But then I think here's a couple of reasons Nadal was able to convince Ignatius to tell his story. Number one, Nadal said, well, all the religious order have the charism. Like, where does that begin? So you tell your story, not about what you did, but you told the story that how God worked in you. How is this inspiration begins in you? I think that's number one. Okay, when you tell the story, yes, it's about our life, but it's not about me. It's about what God has working in me. So Nadal tell Ignatius that. So in a way, like, get over yourself, right? This is not about you. It's about God work in you, and you basically do reports in your life. And the second one, though, Nadal is said is the gifts that God give to you is not for you alone, but for others. So there's a purpose. When we tell our story, I mean, I saw you here, and I think, I would guess you are from very different ethnic group. You probably come from a very, like your struggle and your life story with grace and difficulties. A lot of time we think about grace, we overlook the difficulties, right? This free Ignatius to tell the story as raw, as honest as possible. So it's not just the achieve, right? It's not a thing I'm proud of, but make it a very God as a center and look at all the points of his life. Because everything was given in his formation is not only for himself, but for others. I can share a little bit of my own formation. is because a lot of mistakes that I made. And some of that mistake I learned from, I continue to learn from, and I'm sure, Father Robert and Pepe would say the same. As we work through those things, it's become, you know, the grace for others. Just think about the whole message of this, season. I'm gonna veer off a little bit here. The season of Easter. One of the phrase I think is keep repeating, right? The stone the builder rejected become the cornerstone. Think about that. Think a lot of time we think about our life, we tend to reject it. We tend to go like, okay, I'm not so proud of. When we work through it, it's become the cornerstone, become the grace for ourselves and for others. So for those two reasons, right? Not about us, not about you, but God worked in you. Then Ignatius been so on telling his reminiscence. And then tell in such a way, it's very honest in such a way, is both the thing that he considers success, the thing that he's not so proud of. So when you read the autobiography, as we name it, or the reminiscence, I think it's a better term, you can see the deep sense of honest and pointed to God. Third point, and I'm going to go to the text. Who did Ignatius, told the story to? Here's a man named Camara, a Portuguese Jesuit. A lot of scholars, like been working on this piece right now, say Camara dealing the same issue with Ignatius. And beside they were really good friends, Ignatius picked Camara to tell the story to as a sense of kind of like what? A spiritual, director. So the thing that God has been work on me, and here's a pattern that God worked in you too. Okay, so that's the whole setting until the story. And you read the story, I'm not going to repeat it. My work today is just going to point you to kind of like some of the dynamic, some of the spiritual dynamic that, when we tell our story, what the dynamic I would like to talk about. Transition, right? How do we tell the story? So I love this quote from Nadal. Talk about Ignatius' life. Okay, he summarized it in this way. Ignatius did not run ahead, but followed the Spirit. From this manner or way of proceeding, he was gently led where he did not know. He did not think about founding the society then. However, little by little, the road was opened to him, and he went running after it, wisely ignorant, simply placed his heart in Christ. This is basically summarized the whole journey in terms of what Ignatius' life is about. Okay, so I'm going to just go through here. Okay, this is very important quote from General 35. Why do we tell this story all the time? Why do we keep this Jesuit? We keep this very close to our vest, and also to Ignatian spirituality. And this is the whole point. We travel again the path taken by Ignatius. We retell this story again and again. As in his experience, so too in ours, because a space of interiority is open, where God works in us. See that? Ignatius, but then in us. We are able to see the world as the place in which God is at work and full of his appeals and his presence. Our mode of proceeding is to trace the footprints of God everywhere. Okay, if you don't remember anything, remember that. Okay, to trace the footprints of God everywhere, knowing that the Spirit of Christ is at work in all places, situation, in all activities, and mediation that seek to make Christ more present in the world. That's why we retelling the story. The center of the story is not about Ignatius. Ignatius is dead. Okay, there's a reason we don't call ourselves Ignatian in terms of religious order. We call ourselves Society of Jesus, companions of Jesus. Okay, so tracing the footprint of God everywhere, not in Ignatius' life. We look at Ignatius' life. So you read the autobiography. These are the physical location that Ignatius went through. As told in the reminiscence of Pamplona, Loyola, Montserrat, Manresa, Barcelona, right? So see all the pattern that's going. What is Pamplona? Really quick, a pause. A cannonball shot into his knee. Think about what does that mean? Ignatius was so gung-ho. He wanted to be a soldier. He wanted to win the world, vanities, and all the things that he instilled in his head. He was full force, go one direction. A cannonball into his knee changed the course of life, right? So-called interruption. What are some of the interruption in our life, in your life? Maybe for me, it's coming to the US. To me, is enter novitiate. To me, sometimes going to retreat is you are going and also like something interrupt and you go to the retreat. Something stop our normal daily life. The second one is after you stop, Ignatius was carried to Loyola. And that's where he first began to listen to the movements of the spirit. See, movement, right, to the spirit. He began to kind of see the inner life, pay attention. And then think about Montserrat and Manresa. The up Montserrat is the mountain, Manresa is a valley. All our lives are like that, right? We have ups and downs. Up is when we feel so high, like Ignatius surrender himself and then put the sword all his life into Our Lady of Montserrat. And then he decided to go to Jerusalem. Manresa is the valley. Think about like going down. He's wrestling with his demon, even to the point almost commit suicide. The up and the down, right? Just to kind of say really kind of more surfacing like that. And then he learned even wrestling deeper with his own inner movement. And at Manresa, it's very interesting that when he began to put the seed of the spiritual exercise. So think about the high, right? Give us a lot of energy. Manresa, sometimes we don't think so much about our wrestling, but that's give us depth. This is the spiritual depth that Ignatius learned. Ignatius have to go through. And then you can see Barcelona, Venice, Barcelona, Venice, Barcelona, Venice 3 times. Think about the place where we come back 3 times. That's when we begin to learn how much we have grown. In case Ignatius are going to come back to it, he grow, he grow. And then Jerusalem and Barcelona, Venice too, backtrack a little bit. It's a port. Think about a port. It's a transition where people move to a place to the other place, right? So at the first place of Barcelona, Venice, Ignatius was gung-ho, all in, using a kind of poker language, right? All in, put his mind right to Jerusalem. And then he got to Jerusalem, another cannonball into his ego. Yeah, something like he just like so much desire and put all his effort into Jerusalem. But then Franciscan said, no, you're not supposed to be here. And could you think about it, right? Ignatius was a very spiritual convert, and he was just like want over soul, and he wanted to, all of this, but he didn't have any credential. Would you come to church and let anybody come to church and preach at all? No, right? So through the whole turmoil again, he make one very important decision here. The Franciscan asked him to leave, and Ignatius didn't want to leave. And only when it's being threatened by the excommunication, Ignatius left Jerusalem. And here's the important until Ignatian is we as Ignatius is the sons, members of the church. We will reform within a mother Catholic church. Okay, so Ignatian spirituality, the Society of Jesus, is very much part of the church. That's just very important. As much as we men of creative, as much as we are men of thinking outside the box, we are a member of the church. The second time when he was in Barcelona and Venice, he is disoriented. He was lost. But then that's the first time Ignatius used the phrase, the will of God. So no longer him, but now he began to feel there's another plan is at work. And then after Barcelona, here's the thing, right? Right before, like at the Pamplona, the cannonball right into his knee, get him into the spiritual formation. Jerusalem, this cannonball into his ego, right? That's just all what he wants. Get him into the intellectual formation. He began to go to school, like formally trained and educated in philosophy, starting with Latin and then theology. It go hands by hand, right? But at the same time, spiritual growth is have to precede the intellectual growth. This is very much Jesuit spirituality. This is the order of the constitution that we have. You see the experience that come out, I think is very important. So he been, educated in Alcala, Salamanca, and he keep moving because looking for the place where he can serve soul, where he can get good theology. And by his, the spirit guide him with this lot of spiritual direction, with all that opposition from the Dominicans, rightly so, and lead him slowly to Paris. And here's another thing. At Barcelona, that's when he got a group of friends, right? So he had a group of friends right after Barcelona. But this group of friends in Alcalá and Salamanca is called Friends of Inigo, or followers of Inigo. You can see this friend is still centered in Ignatius. Only when he got to move to Paris, all those friends disappear. And he began to count another group of friends, and it's called Friends in the Lord. You see the transformation from Ignatius as the center to the Lord is the center. You see, this is how the movement, the conversion to the story. And then when he reached Barcelona and Venice for the third time, think about compare the first time and the third time. No longer alone, Ignatius have companions. No longer only one option to go to Jerusalem. Ignatius and his friend now also wanted to go to Jerusalem, but they say, if we're not able to go to Jerusalem, we will go to Rome. Think about going through hardship. Like think about like we went through pandemic. What do we learn? We got plan A, plan B, and plan C. Our life become a little bit more thicker. Before we just only have one plan, right? Maybe we become a little bit more flexible, open to the spirit to guide us. I want to stop at another place, very important, La Storta. So when you pick the second choice, right, there's always doubt. If you apply and the society say yes, and then, for us, we get to go the first option and then second option. We always think like, okay, the second option is to say, oh, fall back onto, and we feel bad about ourselves. And just wondering, is that really the will of God? Or is it like something, I fall back on? Ignatius and the early companions feel the same thing. And what he did, he prayed. He prayed for the grace of confirmation. So he approached Mary and he prayed to Mary, place me with your son. You see that? like simply put his heart on Christ. Place me with your son. And then Las Torta, this is very fundamental to the society because this is where the name of the society come from. So in this prayer experience, in this what we call a vision, Ignatius saw God the Father tell God the Son who was carrying the cross, I want you to take this man into our service. You see that? Into our service. So God the Father asked God the Son to take Ignatius into Christ's companions. That's what the name is about, Compañía de Jesús. And then God the Father also tells Ignatius, I will be favorable to you in Rome. A grace of confirmation. When you discern and you pray, yes, of course, you talk to Father Pepe, you talk to Father Robert, you talk to all. The key is to pray and to ask for that confirmation from the Lord. Is this really the direction I'm going? And then Ignatius and at Rome said the rest just ask Nadal. In a way is what? It's not closing on his story. His story continue. This charism, this inspiration continue. And that's why General Congregation 35 used the title of Fire Rekindle the Other Fires. We look in the map, and this map begin and continue in our own map. You can ask Father Robert, you can ask Father Pepe, myself. We see ourselves in this story, and this story is in us, these patterns. Okay? So we just go, just repeat, just, and then when we look at this, how thick it begin. Look at how the title of Ignatius changed. First, he was caballero, a knight, a soldier, a patient, a hermit, a pilgrim, and then he became a companion. He became a middle of the group. It's called Ignatius. And then he talked about friends in the Lord. You see that become thicker. And the next one, see the one of God, image of God. Okay, when we tell our story, it's layers and layers and layers. Okay, that's the beauties of stories. God began with Ignatius is what? Unknown. It's there, but he wasn't aware of God present. Only at Loyola, through the inner movement, felt God presence. We begin to see God is very demanding, like a judge. That's why he deal with scrupulosity. Only when after he get Mandresa, he see God as a school teacher teaching the student. See, our image of God, when you tell our stories, also grow. It's not still. And then after Jerusalem, he found out God also have dream for him. God has dream, bigger dream. And God called him and understand through tradition. That's what systematic theology and philosophy is about. Not just the one person experience, but our experience is part of a communal experience called the church. That's what systematic theology and philosophy is about. And then he become a student called disciples. And we don't study for ourselves. We study in order to be sent to work in the vineyard of the Lord. So you can see that it's thicker and thicker. Okay, that's when we tell a story. So these are the things that capture all of what I was talking about. Okay.